Hello and welcome to Virtual Education and Cultural Shifts What's Next? Ideas for Policymakers. My name is Courtney Calfee and I'm pleased to be the Senior Director for Global Partner Services for Florida Virtual School. I'm excited to be your moderator today. As you may know, Florida Virtual School has been educating students virtually for 23 years and also develops award-winning kindergarten through 12th grade interactive curriculum. FLVS also partners with states, districts, and schools across the nation to help provide curriculum and to support their programs. We've enjoyed partnering with our distinguished panel to help provide a variety of perspectives from different states on our topics today. Our panelists include Gloria Burdette, Middle and Secondary Learning Coordinator for West Virginia Department of Education, Tamara Wyhe, Division Director for Alaska Department of Education and Early Development, Jeff Renard, Director of Vermont Virtual Learning Cooperative, and Dr. Algaze, President and CEO of Florida Virtual School. During our time today, you can type questions in the chat box that we will answer for you as the presentation progresses. I'd like to turn it over now to Dr. Algaze, who will begin with a brief opening on our topic, and then we will move to the questions for our panel. Dr. Algaze?
Thank you, Courtney, for the welcome introduction. Hello, everyone. Honored to lead this panel in this very timely and relevant discussion. I think we have about an hour scheduled. I'll be taking about 59 minutes, and we'll have a minute to rush through the panel. I'm going to set the table here for our discussion. From July through September 30th, Florida Virtual School saw substantial growth across all grade levels as parents looked for safer options as COVID-19 disrupted education all across Florida. We saw a 98% growth in new full-time students, about double our original number, and a 57% growth in our part-time students. Interestingly, we saw the largest growth among students who were entering a new grade level, such as kindergarten and first graders, the first-time students online, sixth graders, first-time middle schoolers, and ninth graders, first-time high schoolers, and they actually showed the largest increase of new online students. However, now many schools have reopened or will be soon, and parents have a choice to send their children back to traditional schools or to continue online. So we were curious to find out just how many parents will elect online education beyond the pandemic. To answer that question, we surveyed more than 2,000 of FLVS's current parents, as well as thousands of prospective families through our ongoing surveys in Florida. A detailed study will be published soon, and we'll have it available on flvs.net. For the discussion today, however, allow me to share with you a few highlights of what parents had to say. And if you need to enlarge it, I think there are some controls there that can make it a little bigger if you need. So as you can see from the graph here, the question was what best describes the online program your child will enroll into. Before the pandemic in February, there was about an equal amount of parents thinking they'd have their kids either in part-time or full-time online education at some point. When COVID hit in March and schools started to close, we saw a spike, a little bit of a spike, an increase in the full-time parents wanting to have their parents and their kids in the full-time programs as opposed to the part-time. And as April and May we went through the pandemic, through those months, we saw a steady number of parents wanting the full-time over the part-time option. And then summer break, schools closed and they started to talk about reopening the state to business, etc. And we saw a little bit of a drop there. And then in July, there was a pandemic spikes reported throughout the states. And then we saw more interest again in full-time enrollment. And in August, as schools were getting ready, students were getting ready to go back to school, and there was pandemic uncertainty in what the school districts were doing and funding, and a lot of questions that needed to be answered. Parents decided that, or indicated to us that full-time virtual instruction was probably what they were going to do. And through September, already in school, and October, we see still an elevated number in the full-time as compared to the part-time. So as we ask parents what is their general impression of K-12 online education? Pretty much what came to the top was safety, flexibility, and educational value. Those were the highest rated impressions of online education. And now teacher and student interaction are also trending. So you see here, the red line is student safety, which has always been a priority, obviously, for parents in any modality. But the student interaction, the purple line here, we see it ends up in October even above educational value. So we're seeing a shift in some of what their experiences while they have had to go through some online education. Interestingly, parents were more confident in online learning meeting educational needs next school year. When asked what their confidence was in online learning, the top two boxes were 48% that they felt very confident in it, versus 35% in in-person learning, and surprisingly, more than a third of the elementary parents had no confidence in learning in person. Parents are expecting online education in their child's future beyond the pandemic. 65% expect future online classes, and only 5% indicated not enrolling online in the future at all. So overall, by grade level, you see our part-time and full-time question here. The majority, or the largest response, was in middle school, 68%, and in elementary school, full-time actually was higher than part-time, where in the other two grade configurations, it's opposite. So seeing a lot of different opinions with parents of our elementary school kids. Quote from one of the parents in the surveys: "It's been exceptionally rewarding for my son to advance at his own pace in math and science. We are able to spend time on writing and reading comprehension and move at his pace. The individual attention he receives cannot be replicated in brick and mortar school. He was getting lost in the pack learning approach, waiting for the others to catch up in math, frustrating that he wasn't as fast as the girls in writing and reading. He does miss the interaction." That was a parent of a 10-year-old in elementary. And most parents express similar concerns with online education across every grade level. Social collaborative opportunities is one of their concerns. Self-discipline or time management of the student. Too much computer time, which is interesting. And parental time to track child's progress, especially those in K through 5. Those are their main concerns. And it was very similar among the parents that responded. So in summary, pandemic uncertainty influences decisions regarding full-time versus part-time online schooling. Online education is perceived as safe, flexible, and provides educational value. And teachers and student interactions are trending upwards as well. Parents expect full-time and part-time online options beyond the pandemic, and parents are concerned with social collaborative, self-discipline, time management, and computer time. So I'm going to turn it back over to Courtney, who will be moderating for us. And again, here is our distinguished panel who will be addressing several questions. Courtney.
Thank you, Dr. Algaze, and thank you for sharing. And I do see the question, Shay, about the source for the data. That's the data comes from a survey that we did for internally, so with our Florida virtual school families. I do want to first thank again our panel for attending with us today. And as you can see, our panelists come from all over the US. So we have a wide variety of states represented here. And so I'd first like to see if you all would take a couple of minutes and share with us how you serve students in your state. Describe for us the types of students you serve and how you help serve your districts there. And we'll start first with Gloria, please. Oh, wait, you're muted, Gloria. I'm gonna get a shirt that says that, right?
And I actually was thinking, how many times are we going to have to say you're muted because we're not used to turning that on? But we are a statewide program. We're part of the State Department of Education, and we're the West Virginia Virtual School. I work specifically with the middle and secondary schools in our state, and then there's another person in our office that works with the elementary schools, because this school year there's so many students, we had to divide and conquer. It's always been an option. We were created in the year 2000 to help schools offer courses that they couldn't normally offer, AP classes that they can't offer just for 1 or 2 kids to take, because you can't feasibly have a teacher dedicated just to 2 students in a period in a school day. So we were created for those supplemental resources, supplemental courses, and in certain cases where there was not a teacher in the area, there became a world language teacher shortage in our state as well as many other states. So we have 8 full-time Spanish teachers that we help serve schools throughout the state of West Virginia. Then a few years ago, our legislature approved full-time virtual school, and that's when we became an option to help schools with a full-time virtual program. So we are here as a service agency. We're not here as a vendor or anything like that. Everything we do, we're not out for profit or anything like that. We're part of a government services that's available, and the counties can use us to serve their students if they need us to, or they can choose another option. So we're basically, a service unit to help wherever we can and whatever need they have in West Virginia.
And I bet that looked differently depending on which part of West Virginia you're in and what needs they had.
Exactly. In southern West Virginia, they have a lot of trouble finding teachers. It's our coal mining area. And so they need us a lot more than your areas that are in like Morgantown, that are right outside of Pittsburgh. And there's more people. They attract teachers more easily. They have a university there, and students come and go to WVU, and they just stay in Morgantown and teach because they learn to love that town and that community. So, but the rural parts, where especially some of the rural schools, to provide all the AP classes, they just can't do it because their whole faculty for a whole school may only be 15 teachers or something like that, because they may only have, we have one school that has about 40 students, K through 12, but the closest they are to driving to a school system other than theirs is an hour and a half. So, and that's a mountain, because we're a very mountainous state. And, that's on days like today where I woke up to 3 inches of snow at my house, and I'm sure in those mountain areas and the ski resorts that there's a lot more snow. That's kind of a rough bus ride for those kids. So they look to us a lot to help them provide those courses, the AP and elective courses. They're able to provide the core courses, but not the electives and the AP type courses.
That's a great example of how rural districts are best served, or can be served well with online options that way for teacher shortages or all the other things that you've managed. Thank you, Gloria. Tamara, would you like to share with us a little bit about your program there in Alaska and the types of students you serve out there?
I think she might have dropped off.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll skip her and hopefully she can join us back.
Yeah.
I know
she said she was having electrical issues, a storm in Alaska right now.
Oh, yes, she did. I think for her, she said it warmed up, and so I think that might mean that the ice gets in the way of some of the power lines. So hopefully she'll rejoin us. But let's move on to you, Jeff. Can you share with us some information about your program there out in Vermont?
Sure, great. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here and offer our insights. So I'm Jeff Renard, and I started VTVLC back in 2009. Vermont, very similar to what Gloria said, is a very small rural state. Schools are extremely small. It holds true with 20 to 40 students at each grade level. We do have a handful of larger schools, but I originally started VTVLC as a way to provide greater availability of courses for the smaller schools that simply could not offer courses locally that students wanted to take. The larger schools, even though they offered more classes, typically would have scheduling conflicts and issues where students had accessibility issues. They were given a choice between a course they wanted to take and a course they had to take. And then lastly, VTVLC is all about providing flexibility for learning. I often say if I had to take AP Calculus at 7:30 in the morning, I would fail miserably. Allow me to take it at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and I stand a fighting chance. So availability, accessibility, and flexibility for learning are the primary reasons why I started VTVLC. And we operate in a very unique way as an exchange cooperative program around the state, which means that schools provide at least one teacher as part of their regular teaching assignment, facilitate an online class, and in return, that school gets 50 tuition-free seats in any of the courses that are being offered through the partnership. So it's a way that schools can offer more courses and provide that greater availability and accessibility and flexibility without impacting their ADM or their tuition for their funding. So there's a pre-pandemic and a post-pandemic story to VTVLC. Prior to the pandemic, we were primarily supplemental, 9 through 12, with a scattering of middle school programs that we offered, approximately 2,500 enrollments each year. We serve a little over 1,000 unique students. Just to give you some perspective, Vermont has about 84,000 students total K-12. So it's relatively small compared to a majority of our partner states. So now that we're into the pandemic, we've essentially scaled all of our learning ecosystem and promoted more of a full-time option for teachers that simply could not be on campus to meet the needs of the students that can't be on campus. And very similar to the data that was being shared a little earlier, we had between 15 and 25% of families during the month of August, July and August, that were very apprehensive about sending their family, their students on campus because of the pandemic. So in a very quick and rapid, fluid option that we had actually started offering to schools back in April-May timeframe, we found ourselves supporting about half of the districts in the state within a 4 to 5 week period. So if you could imagine 6,000 to 7,000 students showing up on your doorstep a couple of weeks before school starts and configuring all that together into a full-time option for all of those kids. That's the way our last several months have been playing out. So again, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much.
Nothing going on over there. Nothing like trying to accelerate a program very quickly. Thanks, Jeff. And Tamara, I'm glad you joined us back. We know you're having some power issues out there in Alaska, and I'm glad you're able to join us back. So we just switched the order, so you didn't miss anything. I know you've met Gloria and Jeff before, so they were just sort of introducing their programs, and I was wondering if you could share the same about how you serve the districts and the students in Alaska, and share a little bit more about your program with us. Oh, you're muted. I can't hear you. There you are.
Okay,
Oh.
great.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. I apologize. So one of the big challenges that we have in Alaska when it comes to using digital tools is stability of our power. I am teleworking from rural Alaska, and we had a big, it's called a Chinook. It's a warm weather front move in overnight, and it comes with very, very strong winds, which makes our power super unstable. So literally the power went out just moments ago. So I hope I can stick with you. My name is Tamara Van Wyhe. I am Division Director for Innovation and Education Excellence at the Alaska Department of Education and Early Development. And I am just really excited and pleased to be part of the panel today. Alaska and Alaska's statewide virtual system went into a partnership essentially with Florida Virtual Schools last March, in the middle of March, on that infamous Friday the 13th, when it felt like the world kind of started to fall apart. Our commissioner, Michael Johnson, came to me and said, we need to do something very quickly to support students across Alaska, to support our teachers, and to support their families. We had some previous conversations with folks at Florida Virtual as we were talking about and starting to investigate what a statewide virtual learning system might look like. And we were very fortunate to be able to very, very quickly launch some options for stakeholders in Alaska in partnership with Florida Virtual. We've had 3 phases to our project. Phase 1 was utilizing Florida Virtual Global courses to offer courses to students kindergarten through grade 12 after the school facilities closed down last spring. And we were able to offer some COVID classes, basically offered support during fourth quarter as teachers were pivoting and schools were shifting and trying to figure out what school looked like when school buildings were not physically open. Then over the summer, we worked with Florida Virtual to provide a tremendous amount of training to educators and to schools across the state. And then this fall, we fully launched the Alaska Statewide Virtual System, which is a group of 39 of our 54 school districts across the state of Alaska, each offering kind of their own version of the Alaska Statewide Virtual experience. And one of the things we've appreciated the most about the partnership with Florida Virtual is their understanding that virtual school and distance learning and remote education looks very different depending on a state's needs, stakeholders' needs, and they offered us a platform and content that we could use to support learners and teachers and families across the state, regardless of if they're in face-to-face settings or hybrid settings or fully remote or fully in traditional online settings. So excited to be here, and I not having missed the other introductions, I hope that is enough and not too much.
That's perfect. And yes, that's one of the fun things that I love about my job and working here is that no 2 partnerships look the same, and it really is what do the kids need in the areas in which we're helping. So thank you for sharing that. Dr. Algaze, if you want to move forward, we'll move forward the slides. We'll get to our first question, and I'll start first with you, Gloria. What challenges have you seen with remote or online learning that you would like to keep permanent in your state beyond the pandemic? So I know we talk a lot about some of the challenges and the things that we'd like to get rid of with the pandemic, but there are some good things that have come about, and so thinking about some of the good things that you want to keep permanent with online learning after the pandemic.
I think the biggest thing that I could come up with for that is awareness. It has really been surprising to me how many people think that online learning just started on March 13th, like Tamara said, but it's been here in West Virginia since the year 2000, but people didn't know about it. It was like the best kept secret in the whole state. So going forward, I think everybody now knows about online learning. And I hope that it's something that as they evaluate their learning style, the learning environment that their student needs, it's not the learning environment for everybody. And I'm not saying that it is by any means, but there are people that need the online environment, and I just hope that they always have that awareness that if they find themselves in those situations where they're facing things like chemo or something like that keeps them out of the public school system and in those brick and mortar schools, that there's an option for them. So I think awareness has been one of the greatest changes that I have seen come out of this most recent time of the pandemic, and I just hope it remains.
I agree with you, and having been in this space for a long time too, it didn't start in March, but some of us like you in your program in West Virginia were fortunate enough to have a great leader like you, as well as a great program in place. But yes, I agree that it is wonderful for people to at least learn about it. But I see here that Barbara is saying that it's still getting a bad rap in the media. Do you feel that that's the same? That's the way in West Virginia too?
I think people are still trying to distinguish what's the difference between all these different terms we've thrown out there of remote learning and online learning and virtual school, and it means something different. What I do here, or what we do here in West Virginia, and what we call it is totally different than what Jeff might do in Vermont or Tamara in Alaska. So I think people still don't necessarily understand it, but I'm starting to see more positive things on Facebook and some of the social media about how it is working in different areas in West Virginia and for different students. And I'm starting, my emails aren't anymore those frantic emails. They're more like I received one today about, I just want to tell you how wonderful this virtual teacher is and how she has really made a difference in my child. And I know you don't get those kind of emails often, so I wanted to make sure that you knew about this virtual teacher and the extra effort she went. And I'm starting to get those kinds of things now, as people are still starting to see the benefit of online learning and virtual learning.
Well, those are the fun emails and less of the panicked emails that I imagine we all got over COVID and over the summer. Thank you, Gloria. I'm sure, Tamara, that you would agree that awareness is something that's great and that we all want to keep permanent, because it is a great option for many kids, like Gloria mentioned. But do you have other things that you're thinking of that you'd love to keep permanent in your state as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with Gloria. One of the things I would add that's especially relevant to Alaska, and I think states with a lot of rural populations, rural school settings, is just access to high quality content and curriculum that's both vertically and horizontally aligned. You know, I know that Alaska is not alone. There are a lot of states that have very rural places and very small schools. In Alaska, we have perhaps a disproportionate amount. We have lots and lots and lots of schools that are off the road system. You literally cannot get in a car and drive to them. They may be very, very small with 1 or 2 teachers for a K-12 student population. So if you know, an educator or even someone who doesn't have a background in education steps back and says, okay, what does it take for me to be an expert in all of those content areas and all of those grade levels, and then to prepare really solid content for instruction and delivery to my students that's both vertically and horizontally aligned. I know that I'm providing them with a guarantee.
Yeah, it looks like she probably had another electrical glitch. But, you know, interestingly, we were here in Florida created, that was one of the reasons we were created, was for the areas, the rural areas that didn't necessarily have enough kids and the economy of scale to be able to get AP courses or some other specialized courses in their schools. So Florida Virtual School was able to deliver that to them as well. So similar to in terms of the discussion. So I'm glad to see the benefits coming to the other states as well.
Yeah, I do think that, you know, in many, we work with lots of the different state programs. I think we work with 74% of them, and many of them were born out of the necessity for rural programs, interestingly enough. And I know Jeff and Gloria and Tamara also share that. And really, you know, it as a former AP teacher, you know, you can see where AP should be something that's accessible to all kids, and they should have a great teacher, and regardless of where their geography is. So I love that a lot of the programs we work with, you know, that's sort of their mission, is to help the students who may not otherwise have that that experience because of their geography. So we'll catch back up with Tamara when she comes back on. But Jeff, what about you in Vermont? Or what are things that you'd like to see kept permanent after the pandemic?
Well, again, going back to the pre-pandemic and post-pandemic eras, I think one of the things when we were small pre-pandemic, we had a variety of student support staff on board as part of our regular services that we provide to students in schools. As we expanded, the only way that we could expand quickly was to make sure that we provided training to not just the teachers, not just the school counselors, but also the support staff that would be located and supporting the students at their schools. So as a student goes remote, there's a whole series of considerations that you really have to provide to reviewing that data, reaching out to those students, checking in weekly, and making sure that they're making adequate progress. And to scale that quickly, there's just no way that VTVLC would be able to do that. So one of the things I think that has been really exciting and very near and dear to my heart even though that sounds a little corny, is the way that the state has come together to really embrace supporting students who are learning from a distance. Again, without that sense of educational community where each school provides their own supports for their students, we're able to, again, scale very quickly, providing them the training that they need in order to know how to reach out and support their students. And again, relying on great partners like Florida Virtual School to do the heavy lifting in terms of providing that exceptional content. We started off using Florida content in 2009, 2010 when we first started. And it's, was very easy for us to transition to scale, having all of those pieces in place. Back in the spring, when teachers were expected to develop content, switch to remote learning, provide the student support all on their own, that was just a huge lift and a concern that we had. So we wanted to make sure that we could figure out ways to provide great content to teachers, the learning ecosystem and the infrastructure, and then again, the training to help schools support their students who are going to be fully remote. So I want to see that sense of educational community continue past the pandemic. And I think it's really raised awareness with how, what's the difference with supporting students in-house versus being off campus and fully remote.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that, pandemic or any sort of disaster, you see the best and worst in communities. And so definitely we want to keep the best. And Jeff, you mentioned a couple of times about the training. And I see here that Barbara has a message in the chat about, educators not receiving appropriate training. What have you done there in Vermont to make sure that your teachers are adequately trained?
So Vermont, two parts to that. The first is for the teachers. So Vermont actually has an online teaching specialist endorsement. So we're one of the few states in the country that offers that. And it's required in Vermont for teachers who are facilitating learning from a distance to have that supplemental endorsement that rides on top of their content area endorsements. So again, pre-pandemic, we had about 65, 70 teachers that had that endorsement that we work with to provide online learning. Bringing on 120 full-time teachers that did not have that endorsement, we really wanted to make sure that they felt supported but not overwhelmed. So we adapted our 10-credit graduate certificate program. We actually have a collaborative program with Castleton University here in Vermont that provides a certificate in online teaching, fully online, and we adapted that to a 9-credit program that was embedded in what the teachers would be doing this year. So it's still a lot of work, but it's providing a lot of information embedded within the work that the teachers are doing so that they get as much as possible a just-in-time orientation and in-depth support for the tools that they're going to need and the methodologies and the best practices for online teaching. So at the end of the year, not only will they have a year's worth of online teaching experience, but they'll also have 9 graduate credits and be able to obtain that online teaching certificate. In addition to training the teachers, again, I'll go back to all of the support roles that support student learning. Early on during the initial phases of the pandemic, back in March and April, we started releasing short mini courses, both in a facilitated option as well as a non-facilitated version, in transitioning to remote teaching, which was just about how to set up your online office, how to kind of wrap your head around no longer teaching in a traditional classroom environment, but teaching online, totally agnostic to systems. It was really about how you as a teacher can manage your time and kind of set boundaries in working with students so that they weren't working 24/7. So we created that course. We created an abbreviated version of best practices for online teaching, as well as a special ed training program that we could provide to special educators in how do you promote and provide these online services for students needing accommodations from a distance.
All of those are great topics, and it sounds like you had a lot of planning that was done in advance based on your experience doing the program. So I know you can't have enough teacher training, and having had the experience of both a brick and mortar and an online teacher, it feels like you're starting your first year teaching all over again when you come online. So I don't think you can have enough support. So it sounds like you're doing some great things there. Thanks, Jeff. And Tamara, we appreciate you coming back on. Other less dedicated educators would have just said, you know what, we're going to call it a day. So welcome back. And I know that you got cut off a little bit. So I want to give you an opportunity to finish what you might have been saying, if you remember.
I honestly don't remember. I'm not exactly sure where I was cut off. I just kept talking because I didn't know if you could hear me or not. I was talking about just curriculum and access to guaranteed and viable curriculum for those teachers especially in small schools and multi-grade classrooms, and how valuable that is, certainly in Alaska. We hope that's something that will continue. And then I would like to just tag on to what Jeff was talking about related to teacher training. That was one of the big things we really focused on over the summer. We did work with Florida Virtual Schools eSolutions team and provided 2 weeks of training for just shy of 200 educators across Alaska, which is a lot in a state like Alaska. And then we also followed it up with quite a lot of very targeted training, and not just tool training. I think that's important to note, that it wasn't just, here's where to click to make something happen within a platform. The training really did focus on best practices in engaging students in an online classroom, because we know that that was one of the things our educators and our stakeholders were most concerned about, is how can you possibly build relationships with a student when you're communicating, via computer. You have to be in a classroom. So that PD part was really critical, and PD is always important, but I think we've really learned a lot of lessons about how essential it is when there's a shift, and that really good professional development can be delivered virtually, that it doesn't have to mean a bunch of teachers sitting together in a library or in a cafeteria setting, that it can happen in other ways that are less costly and more efficient.
That is true, and although we love to be in person, you mentioned the eSolutions team, they're wonderful, and but we have all figured out how to use Zoom or rooms like this, the StreamPoint room, to be able to communicate, and it can be done. Gifted educators find a way to train and to help and to teach in lots of different modalities. So thank you for that. Before we move on to our next question, which is similar to the question that Tilly's asked, does anybody else want to share anything about professional development before we move on? The student struggles? Okay, well, Dr. Algaze, will you advance us to our next question, which is similar to the one that Tilly's asked in the chat here, dealing with the challenges. So thinking about Dr. Algaze's survey results that he shared earlier with us, parents are concerned, as well as educators and anyone connected with children, about students and their social collaborative needs there and not being met in an online environment, time management or having too much screen time. All of those are things that educators and parents have shared that our survey shown. And so for you, what was the biggest challenge in supporting these students remotely? And then from those challenges, what are the lessons that you're going to take into the future? And why don't we start with you, Tamara?
All right, internet seems stable right now, so I'll try to get my 2 cents worth in. An obvious one is always technology and connectivity, especially in Alaska. We have schools in some of the most remote settings, certainly in the country, perhaps even the world, with some of our really small remote sites. So getting internet to some of those places is nearly impossible. We worked very closely with the Alaska Telecom Association. That's one of the things that resulted from the pandemic, is partnerships that we didn't have a need to take as seriously as we have over the last several months. So in that challenge, we've discovered tremendous opportunity, and it's opened a lot of conversations about, okay, what would it take to get internet into every single one of these communities, even some of those where a cell phone with decent to not great. Data connectivity is the best they have. And then when learning really shifted from the school setting to homes, then we discovered an entirely new challenge, that it may be one thing to have a good enough, a strong enough internet signal and bandwidth in a school setting to use a lot of the tools and a lot of the content that's available. But when you send students to their homes, first of all, are there devices, adequate devices for students to use in the home setting, especially when there are several students of school age needing those devices? And then secondly, is there internet that's sufficient in the home? And quite often we know that the answer is no. So those are challenges that, again, I know are not unique to our state, but I think that the universality of the connectivity and the device issue is certainly sending a loud and clear message. I know it was even mentioned this morning in one of the opening keynotes for EdPalooza. So it's at the forefront of everyone's mind, and it certainly has been a significant challenge in Alaska.
Yeah, that's always tricky. It's hard to educate students if you don't have that, but that is one of the wonderful things, is some of the unique partnerships that have come about between communities, private business, to help these kids, because really we all have a vested interest here. Thank you, Tamara. Dr. Algaze, would you like to comment on the biggest challenge and what lessons we want to take at Florida Virtual School into the future?
Yeah, one of the interesting ones, and I kind of alluded to it as I was going through the data, was the too much computer time. When done right, as these folks do it in their states, that isn't necessarily happening, nor is it something we want happening, where they are sitting in front of the computer 8 hours a day, sitting and getting, without getting up, especially the little guys, the elementary school kids. So that is one of the concerns that the parents have before, even getting involved with it, that might be counterintuitive to folks when they actually go through it, and again, when it's done correctly. And the other thing that was mentioned earlier, that's also counterintuitive, is the amount of interaction that teachers and students have when they are online, as opposed to the brick and mortar, with many of the other distractions that might happen, during a school day in a brick and mortar environment. That the teachers really can delve a lot more deeply into what the student needs, affectively as well as cognitively. So that's another interesting point to be made that was kind of made earlier as well. But yeah, in terms of the challenges, that fortunately we're with the 23 years we've had, we've addressed a lot of them already. We did find that the newer parents to online, of the younger children, we do need to help them, I think, a little bit more, taking some of that educator role, helping them, with that, because it is new to them. Making sure that the kids are on task, that they're doing what they're supposed to do, doing those types of things with the kids is something that I think we can come up with ways to try to help them a little bit more, because that is a challenge, a big challenge for them, especially when it's new to them and they're not accustomed to being part-time educator for their child.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dr. Algaze, is that, we've done 6 through 12 education for, 23 years, but we've only done the elementary for a handful of years. And that's really due to the need that we had at the state as well as around the country for good quality curriculum for little ones. But they present a whole new challenge. You can't expect the same thing from the elementary child as you can from maybe a middle or high schooler sitting at home. So the role of the parent is really key. And I know we've tried to incorporate some webinars and some topics and things like that specifically geared to parents, where we haven't focused as much on that before. So that's a great point.
Yeah, which also goes back to the self-discipline time management. The little guys just don't have it. True.
But then also the time with an instructor doesn't necessarily need to be quantity versus quality. And I do think that you're right, that that's what a lot of people find when they come new to an online environment, is the quality of that one-on-one interaction. That's a great point. Thank you. What about you, Gloria? What are you seeing in West Virginia? What lessons and biggest challenges?
Besides what's already been mentioned, some of the challenges, we've had to learn new ways to meet IEPs and to follow all those special education guidelines, and it's just been a challenge sometime. Just learning, who's going to do this and who's going to do that, and how do we make sure that the learning management system does this for this student. So that's been a challenge. We had a big discussion about that today, and I think we're going to wind up just doing a big webinar about that to hopefully help us, because in the past we haven't had a lot of students with IEPs. But since we have gone from about 1,700 full-time students to over 17,000 full-time students just in our platform, IEPs, that's something that we have really addressed a lot this year. And we actually have one person dedicated to it in the 6 through 12 now, and one dedicated to it in our K through 5 program as well. The other area is the social and emotional. It's outside of the technology, and yes, the technology and devices, that's been crazy. And if I had $1 or a dime even for each time that I've said try another browser, then that, because that helps so many things. But our counselors have really expressed concern about how do we meet the social emotional needs of these students. And it's hard. It just breaks your heart, some of the stories that the students will tell their online teachers now. Just a couple of weeks ago, somebody was living in a car, and they're just facing so much because of this pandemic. So I think for the future that we're starting to work on our IEP and our special education even more, but also we're thinking more, how can we meet those social emotional needs to make sure that the students' needs are being met? Because our goal here at the Department of Education is to make sure that each student has at least one caring adult in their life. And when we train our teachers and we do that PD, we make sure the teachers realize that they may not be in the same county and they may be clear across the state from those students, but they may be that one caring adult and the only caring adult that that child has. So I think the social and emotional is something that has really been a big challenge, that we're taking those lessons and still going with them.
We all are. And I think that, all of us have seen the great growth in full-time students versus part-time. I know, Dr. Algaze, you mentioned that I think our full-time doubled, and I know from speaking with you all that your programs have as well. And so the needs of IEPs and things like that may have been previously supplemental in our worlds are now our full-time responsibility. So I know, we've had to increase staff, as I've heard you all say the same thing, some support staff and ESE staff, because it is, it's a great, the online environment provides so many great ways to meet typical accommodations for many IEPs, but we do need to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all kids. That's something that's very important to all of us. What about you, Jeff? What's your biggest challenge over there?
I actually have two. The first really relates to the timing of everything during the scaling up, and that's making sure that parents know what to expect. And it really is a theme that's kind of surfacing here that everybody's talking about. Parents came at this decision-making process of whether to send their students to a on-campus hybrid approach or to a fully remote approach based on their experience that happened in the spring, which was very different than going into a more formulated, structured, fully online program. So trying to communicate that in terms of what it looks like, what the routine is, what the requirement of the parents would be. And again, like Dr. Algaze says, it's very different for the K-5 students versus the high school students. But translating that effectively to parents, we did a lot of town hall sessions and webinars and informational sessions that tried to get the information as best as we could in front of parents so that they could make an informed decision, so that they would understand what the differences are. So that was one very big challenge that I think we'll approach maybe a little bit differently, but again, I think providing them the tools and the information so that they can really wrap their heads around it is a challenge that we need to address. The other is making sure, especially for larger organizations, that still remaining fluid to adapt to changes. It seems like, it's like the weather in New England and Alaska and West Virginia. If you don't like it, wait a few minutes because it's going to change. We've had the same things happen to the situations here as a result of online learning and results of the pandemic, where day to day guidance would change, programs would change, students' needs would change. Tamara had mentioned about the trials and tribulations of students and internet access at home. Now, add on top of that a parent that has to work from home and has perhaps 2 or 3 children that need to access using that same internet connection. How do you help that parent? How do you modify and support them and remain as fluid and quick to respond to those types of urgent requests is very challenging. So you can plan for the best and, or hope for the best and plan for the worst, and you're still going to hit it wrong each and every time. So just roll with the punches. And fortunately, I've got a great team that I work with, and I work with some really fantastic folks that I have a hard time saying no to anything. So they're very forgiving in that as we look to solve problems across the state. So.
I definitely agree with you that we all got into online learning because we don't like anything to stay the same no matter what. So I don't expect that it will be. It looks like we probably have time for one more question. We've got just about 10 more minutes left. So if you could advance us, Dr. Algaze. What are the long-term benefits do you see of your online program that your past self, February or before, COVID, would be surprised about? And also, if you want to, anything else that we haven't touched on that you'd like to share with us, we'll take a couple of minutes and go around. Gloria, why don't we start with you?
Oh, gee, when I was thinking about this question, I went way back to when virtual school first started in the state. And because at this point, nothing really surprises me because it seems like, it's like he said, something new every day. It's very fluid. So, but I remember thinking when I first heard that West Virginia was starting West Virginia Virtual School, and I worked here at the department at that time, but I worked in a different office. And I can still remember my reaction was like, oh yeah, how's that going to work? And kind of laughing about it. And now here I am in the middle of all of it. And it's kind of amazing to me. But back then, teacher shortages weren't something that we faced on a daily basis. And so I think that surprises me the most. If I could go back and tell my past self, there's going to be a teacher shortage and they're going to have to do this virtual school, I would have been really surprised about that and probably laughed again too. But that was my initial reaction to there's going to be a West Virginia virtual school. It was just approved by our legislature. So I think that's one of my biggest surprises.
That's a great point about the teacher shortage that we haven't really touched on, but yeah, what a great benefit to be able to minimize the impact on some of the different areas with virtual education. Thank you, Gloria. Jeff, let's move over to you. What do you think that the long-term benefits would surprise your past self?
Well, I think it's just going from being an outlier in an educational methodology to more mainstream. I think schools, educators, families, and students are much more accepting of online learning. And I think pleasantly they experienced for the very first time really truly being a self-directed learner, seeing and building confidence in that process, and enjoying the opportunity to be able to move at their own pace and to have that that independence to learn. So, again, going from an outlier to more mainstream is, I wish, under very different circumstances. But again, I think that was, if anything could be said about the process, I think that would be definitely a long-term benefit. You can only preach to the choir so many times without expanding the singers in the group. So
great point. Yeah, that's true. Nobody would have wanted these circumstances, but not all bad here. What about you, Tamara?
I think if I think about my past self, like in early March or maybe later in March, when we first launched our partnership with Florida Virtual, and when we first started getting Alaska statewide virtual system off the ground, it did not go well for a lot of different reasons. There were parts that went very well. Our partnership with Florida Virtual has been great all along, but what was going on in terms of the narrative here in Alaska was very tricky. Tensions were running high. People were scared. There was a lot of uncertainty. What does it mean for school buildings to close? We're in Alaska. Why in the world are we partnering with Florida? How much farther away could it get? And how could Florida teachers understand Alaska's kids? So there was a point in time, probably late in March, early in April, when we really thought, okay, is this battle worth it? And both Commissioner Johnson and I had been through something very similar, actually, about a decade ago, when we worked in the same rural school district in Alaska, and we launched an online learning program, and we could really see the benefits of online learning in terms of diversifying opportunities for students to learn, offering additional courses, sharing teachers, all kinds of different ways that it could be a good thing. So we'd been through it before. We knew the battle was worth it, but it would have been easy to give up because the narrative. It was pretty toxic in some ways. We powered through because we knew what was on the other side. And I guess the thing that surprises that past self the most is how in the course of less than a year, so many people who are our biggest critics could shift over to the side of being our greatest advocates and saying, the quality of the content is amazing. We know what students are learning. We know that these courses are planned. We know that the teachers have training. It's much more transparent in some ways than it was when a teacher would go into a classroom and close the door. So that it's coming from the stakeholder side, but from our teachers too. We had teachers who joined those trainings in early June, and we knew they were coming in as skeptics. My principal told me I had to be here, kind of thing. And by the end of the 2 weeks, they wanted to know when the next trainings were. And I can't tell you the number of teachers that have reached out to us at the department and have said, if and when there's ever a truly like a statewide virtual school run by the Department of Education, how do I apply? Because I have learned that I can really connect with students this way, and I love teaching online. So I never would have thought that might have been an outcome just back in March or April.
And I think all of us in online learning here have had our battle gear on at one time or another, or multiple times. It hasn't been an easy road despite a pandemic. And so, we're glad you stuck with it. And we always do say at Florida Virtual, if you keep your attention on the focus of the students and what's best for them, and having had that experience a decade ago, that this is a good option for kids. So we're glad you stuck with it.
And we were watching from afar, and we're very impressed with how you and Commissioner Johnson were able to navigate those waters and come out with the right outcome, which is, again, what Courtney just said. What's the best for the kids?
Yeah. And what about you, Dr. Algaze? What long-term benefits do you see that you'd be surprised about?
Maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but a lot of the parents who had never been exposed to online education, who came to us when you saw that 70% number of folks, and that right as the school year started, that just came in mass because they weren't sure what was going to happen in their brick and mortar schools. There was too much uncertainty for them, and they wanted, the benefit of the 23-year experience. That now at this point they're making comments about, oh, we're not going back. This is the way that we think is best for our family. Many of them have discovered something that they didn't think was something that they wanted. So I thought it was a very pleasant surprise of those folks who had absolutely no clue what this was like, how much they've enjoyed it. Also, that there was when this first happened, we started to struggle, and like Jeff said, it was new to everyone, but not to us. We were, and Jeff and I know and Virginia as well, West Virginia, Gloria, the things were already in place to be able to take off with it. and the infrastructure was there. So were we. So I say that everybody's new normal was our normal. That's what we did all, day in and day out. So our kids, we said, okay, that was our first check, was how are our students with this? They're not missing a beat. They can continue. We're good. Okay, how can we help? How can we help the state? So we started with helping our state. We expanded our infrastructure in record time, which I didn't necessarily think would have been possible before. But we put everything else on hold and just did what we had to do to make sure that we were available for every single student in our state and to expand enough to be able to help other states as well. So I thought that was a pleasant surprise as well, that we were able to ramp something up that quickly. And the long-term benefit is now we have the capacity, an immense amount of capacity to help others.
And none of us died. Well, we are up at our time. I do want to thank all of our panelists here today for a great conversation. I enjoyed hearing more about your programs and some of the challenges. And I also would welcome anybody who has more questions. We're in the exhibit hall. My team is there, as well as you can send us an email at the number in the chat if you'd like to find out some more information about it. So thank you all for attending. I appreciate it.